Hello everybody, and welcome to my little painting corner for today. We're going to be talking about my little mammoth here, which is from a tabletop game known as Hordes. This particular model comes from a faction known as Skorn. For those of you that might not know who the Skorn are or what Hordes is, this is basically a game from a company known as Privateer Press. It is a war game itself. Basically, main rules for all war games: they make you build and model armies and compete against other people. For this particular game, for the Privateer Press, they own two different games. One of them is known as War Machine, and the other one is known as Hordes. Both of these games can be used coincidentally together. The main difference from both games is based on what your large beast or machine will be. Such as for all War Machine games, they will use mechs or warjacks for their heavy hitters. For Hordes, they will use a mixture of animals or war monsters or beasts, or for example, strapping 4 cannons to a back of an elephant and basically whipping it into submission. Each faction has their own ability, has their own way of doing it. But for this particular faction, the Skorn, these guys are basically, the easiest way to explain them, they are like Easterlings, but they are very more war heavy. For those of you coming from Warhammer 40k, this would basically be the one night stand that Khorne had with Slaanesh that he never acknowledges. And if you said otherwise, he would chop your skull, take away your skull, and throw it somewhere in the worst part of his little throne. But for this particular model itself, it will be either a war beast or a tamed creature. The Skorn itself pride themselves on taming things to such a point where they've actually developed a way to tame creatures through pain, and not just by taming by pain, but by literally creating a magic designed around pain to, if you can master it, literally stave off death just by your own will alone. If you actually look in some of the stories, there is one caster, which will be basically a hero or a leader for the army, that has been able to take a hit by a large cannon to the face. Not a cannonball, a actual cannon swung at and crushed his skull open, and managed to survive and limping all the way home after a solid week, just off his own pain alone. Alright, so for for any of the models, whether it be units or war beasts or casters, they all come with their own card. Each of these cards will have their health total, their powers, their abilities, what weapons they use. For Gargantuan beasts like the Mammoth, they come with 2 cards as well. One is simply to recognize their health, which will be how strong that this Mammoth is, such as their spirals, which if you look up the standard tutorials on war beasts, they will give you a proper explanation for this. But basically, the only way to kill a war beast is to destroy all the spirals, and each damage is identified randomly off of damage versus whatever the armor is, and then once all bubbles are filled, then the war beast is dead and removed from the table. In particular, this war beast right here, the Mammoth, has a total of 56 bubbles. So you're going to have to do a lot of stuff to him, and I'll explain why when I actually get to the rest of his card. So for Mammoth, he also gets the ability known as the Gargantuan power attacks. Basically, this is general rules for all Gargantuan beasts itself. Basically, they can make headbutt, slam, trample attacks, and they can do sweep attacks with their either left or the right arc. Then basically just goes over what the headbutt, slam, the power strike, and the sweep is itself. But basically, for the headbutt and power slam attacks, is what they can do is they can either do a headbutt, which will pile the opponent into the ground if it succeeds and does damage, basically making them prone and easier to be hit. or they can do power attacks, which is basically like, for example, a knockback, or basically like running into them and then careening them into terrain to make them take extra damage that way. The difference between all war beasts can do this, large and huge. The difference is that the huge ones can get 2 inches for their melee range for those power attacks instead of just the 0.5. Then there is the power strike. Our Gargantuan must have at least one weapon with an open fist quality to make a power strike. The power strike attack has melee range equal to the melee range of the weapon, and it must be in the open fist field of fire and have a smaller base than Gargantuan. The Gargantuan makes a melee attack against the target. If it hits, the target is slammed d6 plus 2 away from the Gargantuan and suffers a power attack damage roll, which is basically, for those of you that know, will be 2d6 dice plus the strength of the creature doing the power attack versus the armor of whoever is being hit, and then the damage is damage is subtracted from their armor, and anything left over goes straight to the model. And then also what Gargantuans have is a sweep attack. Gargantuan chooses a melee weapon with the location of L or R to make a sweep power attack. It makes 1 melee attack with this weapon against each model in its field of fire, and within the weapon's melee range, ignoring intervening models when deterring the line of sight. This does not require a attack target, but each separate attack does. These attacks are simultaneous, and models hit suffer a power attack damage roll. Basically, because this war beast is so huge, which I'll even show you, that he has 2 arcs of fire, his left and his right. And in particular, for those of you that haven't played Hordes, they fall back into 7th edition's old rules of arc fire. Basically, every model has a front arc and a rear arc, which you can easily see. For me, what I like doing is I like painting what is my front arc and everything black is my back arc. The only effect of this is for normal models. As long as you're in the front arc, you can attack them. If it's in your back arc, the attacker, someone attacking your back arc gets easier to hit attacking your back arc. Basically like a +2 to their attack or a -2 to your defense, or whatever the rule itself was. But just in particular for his sweep, he has because he's so large, he has separate arcing attacks that cannot cross over. So if I want to make an attack with his left arm on his right, against a model that is on his right side, then I'll be unable to target that thing unless it was at least 2 inches from this center point here where these arcs meet. But it'd have to be in that range. It would have to be that proper arc range. So, as for the rules, basically here's his second card, and here all the stats apply. Here the standard stats for all hordes and war machine creatures, whether it be units or models or soldiers or whoever, they all have the same stats of speed, strength, mat, rat, defense, armor, and command. Obviously all these vary, and it depends on what the model itself is, but I'll explain at least what the Mammoth does for this one. So, speed. Speed is basically how far they can do during an advancement, or basically a standard movement. So if I just move my Mammoth normally, he can move up to 4 inches, unless I give him the run order, which specifically for war beasts, they have to be within a range of the warcaster or the caster that is in their battle group. Some casters don't have to be war priests, but you don't focus on that until you actually join in the game, and you'll see for all that yourself. So if I make them run, it basically just doubles their speed. So example, if I make him run, he goes to speed 8 because it'll be double of 4, and then apply whatever speed bonuses I give him, like rush, like +2 to his movement or whatever, and then that's his distance. Strength is 15, so his base power for all his weapons will at least be 15 damage for all his melee attacks. Mat, which will be how well the creature can hit. So, such as, for example, a mat of 6, which I want to say a mat of 6 or 7 is about average, depending on the certain things. Some models can go up to mat of 9, 10, I think. But like those are like really, really advanced models, or there's abilities that give them pluses to their attacks. Rat is exactly like Mat, how well you can hit, except Rat is how well you can shoot. So whenever you roll your dice, you'll be adding your Rat to it. So for example, he has a Rat of 4, which means if I target an opponent, let's say a unit on the far end, if I want to hit them with a ranged weapon, I have to roll whatever my Rat is, or if they're melee, I'll do my Mat, plus 2d6, and then I'll go against their defense. So, for example here, Mammoth defense is 8. So as long as the attack, either the Mat or Rat of the attacker, is equal or greater than your defense, then the attack hits. So, on average, Mammoth itself, he's a really big target, easy to hit. Basically, the only way to fail is if you are out of range, or if you have just a horrible roll, such as the Snake Eyes. As far as I know, as of currently 2020, the main applied of the rule is Snake Eyes is automatic fail for hits only. Now, armor. Armor is the other stat you want to pay attention for. Well, hang on, let me go back to defense first. So, about 10 to 12 is about average. A properly armored soldier will be 12. Someone that can dodge really well will have 14 defense, and so on and so on. Basically, the more high, I want to say the hardest to hit would be about 16, 18, just to hit alone. Because normal mats or rats would be like under 10 at least, unless you have a rule that gives you something that lets you do that. That's a lot of focus for that. So armor. Armor is basically how much damage you can take. The armor is versing whatever weapons that you fight against. Basically any damage that goes through, any damage that is greater than your armor is then applied. Any damage that is greater than this armor will be then applied to your life spirals if you're a war beast, or if you're a war priest as well. You'll have a separate type of health. Unless you're just a unit or a regular model, then you'll just lose the model itself, because most of them just need 1 damage to die. Alright, so now for all War Machine and Hordes models, on their cards they'll have these extra digits here. Each one has their own thing. In particular, I'm just going to go over the 2 rules for him. He has what is known as Assault and Pathfinder. Assault is basically you can shoot and melee in the same turn, which is kind of helpful because for the Mammoth, he's a really big guy. It's ideal to be able to use your siege battery while you're in melee combat, because that's what you always want to have him come in and attack, and I'll explain better damages in the future. And then the other one is Pathfinder, which will be your movement. So basically, Pathfinder lets you run through difficult terrain, or like forests, or rough terrain like rocks or whatever. So anything that does negatives to your movement, you can go through it. The only other one besides Pathfinder is Aquatic, which is basically a water symbol. Basically, water of deep oceans, or if you have another ability called Fly, which is like a wing or something, that allows you to just go over terrain without having to deal with it. Oh, and I also forgot to mention Command. The only time you're ever going to deal with Command is if you are a squad, such as a squad of soldiers, or if you have an ability that requires you to use Command. Other than that, you're not really going to deal with it as much. So, next we'll be moving on to we're going to do one more thing before I move on to his weapons and stuff. Right over here, as you've probably all noticed, is something that says Fury and Threshold. Alright, so for War Machine, for hordes, they use a resource called Fury. Basically, is how angry can you make this creature until it goes mad and starts destroying everything in front of it. So, with the Hordes faction, you have to be able to manage Fury on the War Beast and be able to either pull it away or take it off or put it on in order to make sure that your creature doesn't either kill your own troops, or if you have it close enough to the enemy, you make it attack that enemy and kill stuff. So for the Fury stat for all War Beasts, this shows how many Fury can be applied to the creature without it being maxed out. So for the Mammoth, he can have a maximum of 5 Fury on him. And for those of you that don't know about Hordes and War Machine, basically the max stat for most War Beasts, or for all the War Beasts for Hordes, their max stat kind of blends normal ones around 3 or 4. Like any medium-sized one will always be a 3, unless it's like a really tiny War Beast, or the better ones will be like a 4 Fury at maximum. So this is pretty good right here itself. And then next to it is a thing known as a threshold. Threshold is basically a check that you have to do every time you begin upkeep, and he has Fury remaining on him. So, easiest way to explain, at the beginning of your turn, you have to do what is known as a maintenance phase, which is basically taking your Warcaster and removing all the Fury from all War Beasts in his war group. That basically War Beasts that are directly under him. Most War Beasts will be under the Warcaster, but there are some exceptions. So any War Beasts that fall under that Warcaster, he has the ability to take Fury off him. And on the Warcaster itself, they have a limit of how much Fury they can take. So for this example, let's say here, my Warcaster took all but 1 Fury off my War Beast. So at the end of maintenance phase, he has 1 Fury remaining on him. I now have to do what is known as a frenzy check. So basically, I take 2d6, I roll it, and then I add how many Furies on him. For this example, there's 1 Fury on my War Beast. So basically, as long as that number is equal or less than a threshold, which for example this one is 9, he does not go crazy or frenzy. If he does frenzy, the rule for it is basically he shakes off any abilities that prevent him from attacking and moving, and charges the nearest target. Key phrase is nearest visible target. Ally, enemy, it doesn't care. It will go mad and start killing things in front of it. In some instances, it's helpful. Other instances, not so much. So, ideally, if you want to be a good Warcaster, you don't want to have your beasts go mad without you letting them run free. Alright, so for the weapons that the Mammoth has, we'll go ahead and start off with the Siege Battery. Basically, these little 4 cannons on top of them. Ooh. So, his 4 cannons is the Siege Battery. It has a range, which is 12 inches. A rate of fire, which is how many shots I can shoot, which is D3 plus 1. Or basically, I roll a D6, divide the roll by 2, and then add 1 to that, and that's how many shots I get. And it has this extra ability known as AoE. Basically, whatever target I choose, if it hits, it will hit an additional models within 3 inches of the target. Centered on the target itself. And if it misses, what it does is it'll do this thing called deviation, which will pull out one of those old scatter templates. We will roll extra dice to see how far in which direction, and it could either deviate back, deviate forward, go into the lines, fall backwards, hit your own men. Basically, it's one of the its old 7th edition scatter templates. And then, ironically enough, for those that do play War Machine or Hordes, this game itself has been around at least before 2012, minimum. I don't know I don't know when this game itself came out, but this game's been around. So, in case you haven't played 40K or War Machine or Hordes or any type of thing with scatter templates, it's basically something like that. And then the weapon itself has a POW, or Power of Weapon, which is 15, which means this is the minimum damage that is applied to your damage roll against the armor of whatever target you actually hit. Next, we'll go over his melee weapons. The first one will be his tusks. As you can see right here, beautiful tusks on him. You never want those things to come right at you, though. So, for melee, all melee weapons, they basically have 3 abilities. The first one is the range. So I have 2 inches of range for his melee weapon, which will be his tusks. The weapon itself has a power, which is 3. And then for all melee weapons, they have this extra tab known as P and S, which means power plus strength. Easiest, and it automatically sums up what it normally is going to be. So, for example, it has a POW of 3, and he has a strength of 5, which means the power and strength of these tusks are 18. So anything with 18 armor or less is at least gonna be hurting, depending on whatever you roll on your 2d6. Now, for his Fields of Fire, he has a War Gauntlet, one for left, one for right. Both of these have range of 2, a power of 4, and a power plus strength, which is 15 plus 4 equals 19. Reason why I'm saying it like this is because there are abilities and effects you can do to either power up your strength, decrease it, or do other things. So I at least want to make sure those that haven't played the game understand what I just want to convey. Another effect on the weapon itself, some weapons will have these, others won't, is this particular one is known as the Open Fist rule, which really only applies to the power strike abilities that I explained on the earlier card. Basically, it means he has an open hand with the attack. As you can see from the model itself, the War Gauntlet itself is basically just a large shovel blade. Shovel blade, I call it. Basically just a large piercing weapon, and he still has full use of his 3-fingered fist. So, the only real effect that this would do, for those that don't know, would be for grapple abilities, like a power attack known as a throw. Basically, you can pick up your target and then just chunk them in a direction. All this really does is show that he has bonuses to that attack. Now, for the backside, there are basically just does extra listing and abilities that the beast itself has, as well as any weapons it might contain. And for war beasts in particular, they will always have a thing known as an animus, or an innate ability that they can cast. Basically, they channel their energy or fury or whatever, and they activate an ability. So for the Mammoth itself, his is known as a counterblast. It will apply to fury on him. It has a range of self, has no AoE, no power, and it only lasts for the 1 round. For the round, not the turn. For the game round, but not the game turn. Specifically, it works for both you and your opponents, and not just for that 1 turn you cast it. So, for his counterblast, when an enemy model advances and ends the movement in the spellcaster's command range, which, if we go to my command range here, is a 6, the spellcaster can make 1 basic melee or range attack targeting that model. Then counterblast expires, and this counterblast only applies for 1 round. So easiest way if you all haven't figured it out is within 6 inches from his piece, if any enemy model advances, basically moves and ends their movement within 6 inches of this model, you can either shoot them with your cannons if they're out of your melee range, or if they're within 2 inches, you can attack them with your War Gauntlets or Tusks or whatever you decide to do. And then you just basically reapply back to your main thing. go to hit, go to shoot, apply damages if you hit them, roll dice to deal damage, kill, whatever. Now, for the Mammoth itself, he has only 2 abilities. The first one, his innate ability, which is Bulldoze. When he is base to base with an enemy model during its normal movement, he can push that model up to 2 inches directly away from it. A model can be pushed by Bulldoze once per activation. Bulldoze has no effect when it makes a trample power attack. Basically, the ideal way you'd want to use this ability is if you have a lot of small fry just budged around your war beast and you want to get through it. Now, luckily, you can already shoot your cannons, but you want to at least give him some breathing room. So what you can do is use his ability, which is his innate ability of Bulldoze. So as long as they're base to base, meaning base to base contact, they're just pushed and moved 2 inches away from that model. And then if you're curious on what a trample power attack is, basically it's having your war beast run over either units or models or whatever, as long as they're smaller than the base of the trampler. You just run over them and then land on the other side, as long as there is room for the piece, which can be quite effective, especially if you're fighting a lot of small stuff. And his other ability is known as a critical pitch. On a crit against a model with equal or smaller base, the model hit can be thrown d6 inches directly away from this model. The model thrown does not deviate. The power of the collateral damage is equal to the strength of this model. Alright, so first off, main thing is, what this references is his tusks. So if I'm using my tusk weapon and I roll a crit, which is basically doubles, or if I boost the attack, triples or whatever, if I roll doubles of something to hit the target, not only will on the hit itself, I have the option to throw the model in a direction, directly away from 6 inches directly away from my Mammoth here. And then what happens, so basically the model's thrown, it hits, it just chunks like up to 6 inches away. And the thing of collateral damage is if a model is basically thrown, trampled, pushed, shoved, if he is moved into something not in his own free will, basically being shoved against a wall or a larger ally or enemy, he takes what is known as collateral damage. Basically, all collateral damage will always be usually 2d6, and then unless it has extra ability, then it applies damage. But for this particular one, for him, it'll be whatever the strength is for my Mammoth, which will be 15 normally. And that is basically it for the Mammoth itself. If you guys like anything so far, definitely just gladly give me a like or a thumbs up or a comment on any different paint styles that you have or models, or if you have any questions about the game itself, please let me know, and I can either give you some extra information or I can refer you to videos of other channels that probably can explain this a lot better than me. But I will thank you guys very much for joining me, and I hope to see you all again in a little while. Have a wonderful day now.